Peace, everybody. How you doing? It's Aseer the Duketeers. I want to say thanks. It's been a while since we spoke. A lot of things have been going on. Of course, as usual, we like to build on and discuss. One of those things has been a lot of the so-called celebrity deaths that have been happening. It's really sad, but a lot of that stuff is also indicative of how the enemy uses things like what they call murder by Sting referred to it as murder by the numbers, as well as aspects of what's called the gematria, as well as the negative aspects of what people refer to as the cliff off, which is the reverse of the tree of life, what they call the tree of death. So unfortunately, we live in a land where a lot of people use that type of occultism to be able to siphon and use the death energy of people to bring about greater polarital switches or shifts. So we've had a whole series of them, from Aretha Franklin, who actually is interesting that she was buried on Elvis's birthday. I find that's interesting, just like I find it's interesting that Mac Miller died on the same day that Eazy-E was murdered. So you gotta understand, we're at a time where the open secret is now that it's okay to basically be your worst self, to get the best out of it. There's this whole element of people believing that now, in this era that we live in, that it's possible for you to live bad and receive good things, and that would never really be. However, the enemy has co-opted people's common sense to the point where they don't understand that they have become literal walk-ins for agendas. So everybody's getting ready for this so-called Trump impeachment talk that's going on, and you don't understand that a lot of that is also predicated on what's happening in Africa. Big up to our African brothers and sisters. One in particular, brother Bobby Wine. He's pushing to become president of Uganda right now. A lot of people don't know about what happened in Uganda, but Uganda basically has been run by the CIA since the assassination of, I would say since the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. And it has been going through consistent upheavals to the point that a lot of the African states are being challenged by the youth. The youth specifically creating a blowback system from the old oligarchical patriarchy Africans that were put in power during colonialism, during the end of colonialism. So what you see happening here in the United States is a push for so-called black people who have been misnomered as African Americans or whatever they want to call themselves. They have been put in a position now where they are going to have to identify with an actual so-called African country if they're going to nominate themselves as that. And what that's going to do is it's going to make them foreign to the land of their birth, which is the whole purpose of this whole trans situation anyway. So when Trump was talking to the so-called black pastors and they said he's the best black president or the most black president, all that, besides the coonery that's involved with that, you gotta understand is more to it at stake than that, because our people, despite what these dirty Moors and despite what these stupid RBGs and all of these so-called divisive or divisive blacks are talking about, the very fact that you actually have a nationality in the world that can be traced all the way back to when this thing started. This thing started in 1492. I don't give a damn what anybody is talking about. I don't give a damn whatever conscious movement or group you come from or whatever. If you was born after 1492 and you this color, you was affected by the fall of our last stronghold, which was Grenada. And based upon the fall of Grenada, because we don't understand our connection and because they cut you off from your understanding of how you relate to the land indigenously, as well as how you relate to your cousins in them from what we today call the continent, you have a distorted sense of your perception as well as your identity here in America. So there's a big push right now on the internet where you have all of these people talking about all of this Aboriginal American, we was always here, African Americans ain't African, which is really dope. Let me first preface it by saying that. That's dope. It's really good that we're in an era now where we can start to accept the fact that this is our home. What is not good is the fact that these people now are trying to diss the Moors. There's some of those groups, not all of them, but some of those groups out there now trying to diss the Moors or the Moorish Americans, basically saying that they could be indigenous or whatever without that. When really, if it wasn't for the Prophet Noble Jew Ali, if it wasn't for the Moorish Science Temple of America, right? If it wasn't for the divine and national movement, there would be no understanding of the fact that we was here. Because the first person to talk about us being here, when the European came here, they found Moors up and down the Mississippi River, was or is the Prophet Noble Jew Ali, peace be upon him. And based on that, the actual fact that most people didn't even find out or even understand that we were indigenous to this land until maybe 5 to 10 years ago. Because I remember, I've been out here living like this, experiencing what it's like to speak to other nationalities and cultures about my true nationality and culture, and them acknowledging it, while at the same time wondering why our people are so at odds with who they are. This has nothing to do with me wanting you to be a Moor or the Prophet wanting you to be a Moor or any of that. This has nothing to do with it. I'm not talking from that perspective. I really don't care what you choose to call yourself in the end, because I know what I am. You know what I'm saying? I know from whence my people came, and I was able to trace and do what I need to do, and I'm working to move to a position where that becomes a universally accepted fact, because it already is. The only people that's fighting against who they are is the people that is meant for. But that's how it was, because we have a misconception of Hebrew and all these ancient words, because we keep using the Bible and stuff like that. And that's not a problem, but it's a problem when the context is not put into the proper perspective. So just to be real quick to get into that aspect of our history, the so-called Hebraic, or the Hebrew, or the Hebrew, or the Hebraic people that you refer to them as that, all can trace their lineage to Musa. Musa is Moses. Some people say that Moses was tough Moses, right? But I won't get into all of that because I want to get into the debate and all that crap. But long story short, those Hebrew people were a conglomeration of different people who lived in the almost as second-class citizens within the greater Hikepata, i.e. Egyptian culture. And these guys decided that they wanted to have their own, but they were not unified behind one central thought, because they were from a bunch of different places. But what binded them together was their economic system, the caste system that they were in. And in Egypt, they were in the system today that you would say the Mexicans was in. But the Mexicans ain't slaves, but they worked for much less lower wages, and they weren't necessarily from the indigenous aspect of the Egyptians. So what happened was they decided they wanted their own, and because Musa was the son of them for real, what he did after he allegedly, this is how the story goes, what he did was after the Egyptian was killed, he had to run into what they call the wilderness of Midian. Midian back then was a place called Havilah. Havilah back then is what we today now call South or Southern Arabia. At that time, that was under the jurisdiction of a people of a high priest named Jethro. Jethro was married to an Abyssinian queen named Zipporah. Zipporah of the Abyssinian and Jethro, they all together represented the so-called Midianite clan. But these ancient Midianites were also Ishmaelites, and they were the ones who were the keepers of the Kaaba stone. So at this point, the system that is functioning, that the original people are functioning under, is a triangle system, right? That triangle system was supplanted, and under that triangle system, the highest god was El, or what they call El Shaddai, also referred to as the Great Destroyer. Also referred to, and El Shaddai had a wife named Aseer, and Aseer had a daughter named, a daughter and a son. And this became basically the Holy Trinity, right? El itself, right, who was the highest god of the God of gods. El in Hikepata, aka Egypt, was referred to as Aseer, aka Osiris by the Greeks. And so the Hebrew people, after Musa left and became a Moor, meaning that he studied 35 to 50 years in Egypt, and then when he left, he received the highest, the prophecy, and became what's called the high priest of Anu, right? Anu is also Anubis, which is also Anpu, right? Which represents the dog head god, which is also a symbol of melanin, deep melanin. So long story short, the high priests of Anu were also referred to and called the Moors. The symbol for them was the glyph with the owl, right? With the mouth. One has the owl with the mouth, and then there's like a squiggly line next to it. Basically coming together with the vowels out, MR, meaning more. So any word that you put between MR, the root of that is always more. So if it's AMERICA, or it's MAROCCA, or MOR, whatever it is, whenever you get an M and an R in the root of whatever the word is, the more set that up. So long story short, your man's in them, Musa, decide that he gonna have his own thing, and so they decide to change the god Il, or El, into the god Yahweh. And now Yahweh, or Il, becomes Yahweh, and now we replace the triangle system with a cube system. Remember, because the cube, what they call the, I think it's called the phylacter, that they wear in their head. When you see the Jews wear the little black stones on their head, as well as that's the symbol of the black stone that they walk around the circumambulation in the Kaaba, right? That's the same stone they wear in their head, the black stone, right? The black stone as it stands, what's up, buddy? The black stones as it stands is the element, right, of Saturn. So we went from a straight solar, actually, worship, right, a solar system under the pyramid system, to now a cubist system, which is now under Saturn, right? And then the Hebrews decided now they were going to go and take the land from the ancient Canaanites, who, i.e., are the Moors, right? The traditional Moors that had a kingdom that was antecedent, that was analogous, antecedent, and pre-dynastic to Kemet, to what we today call Hikkepetah, that some people call Kemet, that some people call Tamaray, that some people call Egypt. Whatever you want to call it, it's the same thing. Move up there. So what happens is they create a system now in which now they're going to systematically go into Canaan and take everything that Canaan got. And so when we talk about, come back in, man. So when we talk about the fall of Jericho, and we talk about the breaking down of all of the ancient societies, the ancient kingdoms, that happened with the fall of Jericho. And so in response to that, the Moors, the Canaanites, needed to be compensated for that. So they went, according to the Circle 7 Quran, they went to, again, the Paharus, right, the Nasut, right, the pharaohs of so-called Egypt, and let them know that they needed to get their land back because the Canaanites came and absorbed their culture and took it and basically adopted it and put the Hebrew name over Il. So what we consider as Hebrew alphabet and Hebrew all that, no. All that come from Canaan. All that come from Canaan. If it don't come from Canaan, it's coming from Midian. And again, that's part Abyssinian and part pre-dynastic Islamic culture, period, right? So that goes down, and they run everything as long as they can up until the time of Sargon the Great, in which the Assyrians came and then shut down the state of Israel, or what we today call Israel. But that was in conjunction with the fact that they were already lost. See, what made the Hebrews such a situation was that because they weren't a direct people themselves, because they weren't a people, so because they weren't a people that had their own identity outside of that, they were a conglomeration of people. The Hebrew peoples were part Nubians, part Assyrians, part this, part that. Anybody that didn't have as much bread as the principal society or people they were living around was considered Hebrew, because they crossed over. They crossed over, meaning that they not only crossed over the River Jordan, they crossed over the people and the identity that was already there prior to them adopting it. And this became the first time in history where you had another group of people that started to adopt a whole nother groups of people identity. But those people's identity that they adopted, the Canaanites, Moabites, Hamathites, Hittites, the Hittites ruled, who were the Moors, ruled Kemet during that period. Then you had a period of the great sea kings, where a lot of the Moors went back and they decided to just wipe out so many things, right? Wipe out Egypt was really the last one to stand. This was towards the end of the Ramsey period. So after all of that goes down, they have their own kingdom. They lose it once, they lose it again. Then finally Nebuchadnezzar comes in, shuts the whole thing down, takes them all back to Babylon. And now the Cubist system, right, is now going through an incubation period. in which now they start to create things like the Talmud, and they start to create all these different types of what we would today call Kabbalistic mystery, which was really just a basic aspect, a mixture of ancient so-called solar Egyptian magic. Then you had the Babylonian magic. Then you had what they received when they was in Midian, right? In the cube system under Saturn. Then you had all of the stuff that they had taken from Canaan. So all of that gets jumbled up into a big gumbo, and then eventually they're allowed to go back. But now from this point, Yahweh, if you want to call them that, tells them that they can never be an actual nation state again. So once that all happens, we done already established our dominions and kingdoms known as Morocco, Tunis, Algiers, and Tripoli, right? And all the said dominions around that. And so now we go from a pyramid system to a cube system, and now we get the rise of Christianity. Now we're going into a vertical system, a vertical horizontal system. We have a vertical horizontal system. This is the rise of Christianity with Constantine and them. But then the Moors decide that what we got to do is break away from the disgusting Moorish Empire, and they set up what's called the Holy Roman Empire. Analogous to that, you have something else called the Ascari Brie, right? That's the original nobility, black nobility of England and Europe and all of that. And then from that point, everything is rocking, because all of Europe and that was set up by, again, the story of the descendants of Christ, the Merovingian dynasties, all of that. All of that is Moorish history, but I want to kind of get into the last part of it. So the last part of it now comes in the rise of the circular system. And the circular system is now founded by Islam, right? When you see a circle and when you see the crescent is basically just the circle. The part you don't see is still there. And so Islam now becomes the reinvested aspect of the old Canaanite empires, the old Phoenician empires, the old so-called pre-dynastic Comedian empires, all culminated in together. Because believe it or not, when the Hebrews fell, it was the Greeks, the Macedons, and them people that went in and redid everything and created a form of what they call iconoclasm, where they come in literally whitewash everything. That's what the Renaissance was about. So by the time that we as the Moors basically re-civilized all of humanity, we wind up falling down to our noble nature, because again, when we were running the Hebrew system, right, after the Hebrews kicked out, we still had control over them through an aspect called the Pahath Moab. Look it up. These were the actual Moors, the high priests of Anu, the Moors, who actually chose who the kings and, who the high priests of the Levite, of Dan, of Reuben, and all of them would be. Why? Because we were the ones who they got their culture from at the fall of Jericho. All right? And so when all the Moors of Jerusalem and all the ancient natives and autochthones basically wound up consolidating themselves, we left and came over here, because we was always over here. So the story now is what I'm trying to say. All of this to show you, not only was it based upon the indecision of different groups that were now vying for their own control, this was the beginning of people trying to adopt other people's identity to stay on the land. And they've been doing that ever since. That's why a lot of these Hebrew Israelites see people so angry. You understand? Because in the end, the stuff that they talking about, there's truth to it. The prophet said we're not supposed to give up our Bibles because we're going to have use for them in the end. But again, the Bible was just the spell book that was, again, authorized by King James, the last real Moorish ruler of the so-called Holy Roman Empire, if we really want to look at it from when it was straight black. Because King James was the one who basically authorized this thing that was done. And so what happened was the so-called pale Europeans, they wanted to take control of the house of the black so-called nobility over there. And so James was fighting against them and was basically not allowing the commoners to come up, because the commoners were the pale-skinned albinos that was living in the barns and the hutches and all of that. They were the ones that was under that, whereas all the castles and all of the stuff was under the true Moors of that Holy Roman Empire. And so what they did was they made you today hate King James and hate all of the Moors and hate anything about Christianity and hate all of that, when you really don't understand that that was your nobility that they had bleached out. And once they cut the head of Charles I off, it was us now fighting to stay on power from that point on. And as we got bleached out, as they poisoned King George and did all they did, they moved into the European monarchy, and from the European monarchy set it as a dovetail to come over here and destabilize the greater Al-Moroccan Moorish Empire that went all the way back to pre-dynastic Kemet, all the way back to the Phoenician expansion, all the way back to what we call the super ancient world. So again, I'm saying all this to say that you as a Moorish American, or you as a Moor, you have all of this culture and all of this history and all this identity in you, but what you have to do is qualify it. And what they don't like is the fact that you as a Moor have an identity that is distinctive outside of what anybody else is telling you. And the only person that's going to stop you or trying to stop you from achieving it is people that's your same color. Because these is the ones that work with these albinos and these draconians to lock you out of the box in the beginning. So again, you want to holler at me about more of this type of information, you want to holler at me about really getting your own identity consolidated and right and all of that, hit me up at houseofl@hotmail.com. Also, when it comes to the understanding of who you are as an individual, understand that the only person that can really grasp that is you. We are here to absorb all of the negative things that are said to us and basically charge that to the higher self, because our line bring us this far to bring us here. Also, you want to get into some sort of healing, real alchemical healing for the body and the skin. Remember, the skin is the largest organ on the body. You need to hit up Cordoba Organics, www.cordobaorganics.com. Please, all of her products not only work, but they actually heal things like eczema, things like bad backs, things like rosacea, things like psoriasis, all types of stuff, man. But these are the old alchemical processes and things that our ancestors passed down to us. You see what I'm saying? That we are now the inheritors of. So the same way they was making lotion and all of that in Granada, in Cordoba and all of that, my queen is doing the same thing as a descendant of them Cordobans, a direct descendant again. So when you start to be able to qualify your direct lineage and you can understand how your so-called tribal name is annexed to your clan name, meaning your tribal name is the name you were born with, which is connected to whatever native or American Indian tribe that's there, get it. Hit me up, houseofl@hotmail.com.